Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Ben.
I'm Nico, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Our guest for this episode is a game developer, reviewer, and author. A man of partnerships. He is one half of Pillbug Interactive, who have released titles across PC and Nintendo, and one half of the writing duo known as DK Fields.
His most recent novel, Equinox, came out in February of 2023 and is set in a world where two souls can inhabit a single body, one by day, one by night. We'd like to warmly welcome David Towsey.
Hello, Dave.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me on the show.
That's quite all right. That's such an impressive resume. I remember first realising the breadth of how much you have achieved and done, and just being really desperate to talk to you about how on earth you managed to do all this. But I think like the main question that I've got to start us off is, did you find that being a writer helped in the game development process, or was it the other way around? Or
well, it was kind of interesting in your intro there that game developer came first because, that's something that I came to relatively recently, certainly after I was writing for quite a long time. And I came to really through my work as an academic in creative writing.
Oh, cool.
So I'm sure we're going to get into some imposter syndrome stuff with today's questions.
You are going to fit in, Dave.
But the games development stuff, I as you say, I'm one half of a very small games development team of obviously two people. We have a bunch of fantastic freelance people who do things like music and logo work for our games, but really, I'm just part of the development team as a narrative guide. I do the writing, obviously, and I get to be really active in kind of, I suppose, game design. But I couldn't code for Toffee, so that side of it is done by my friend Sean, who's the other director in Pillbug. And I'm always in awe of what he does, and I think he just about tolerates what I do and appreciates what I do, especially since I started doing pixel art. That's the thing I feel like. I mean, as much as I love writing for the games, I feel like my major contribution these days is actually pixel art, which I'm really enjoying.
I find that that's a really interesting rundown because obviously Nico and I run the Tiny Bookcase podcast together, at both as equal partnership, and it is really interesting working with people that have very different skills to you, and then where those two, where the line is, and it's really interesting taking a little toe over the line sometimes. Like I have done little bits of art for the podcast, but primarily Nico is a fabulous artist and he does it all.
Oh, great! Mm-hmm.
But I loved doing that, but it was just, it's sort of a waste of time me doing it because he can do it so much faster and better than I can.
But that's also why I don't write the emails, Ben.
Yeah, well, I know exactly what you mean. I certainly didn't feel. I had weird dreams of learning to code and thinking, "Oh, that's going to open up a real job in my future" and things like that. And I quickly realized I'm far too old to pick up that kind of new skill. So I stick to the writing instead.
Well, with advances in AI now, you could probably use ChatGPT to do a big bunch of it.
Oh gosh, yeah. Was that 2 minutes for it to take for us to mention ChatGPT?
Our podcast will be gone before long. It can write stories and it can read them out. So we are done.
We should name the AI for it Eusteris, our pet wizard. I think that would be.
That'd be great.
That would be good. Right, I think we should proceed to the stories, gentlemen. Regular listeners know how it goes, but for those of you joining us for the first time, there'll be going to be 3 stories told in this episode. All of them have been written to the same shared prompt this week. The prompt is Split. It was chosen by David, and Nico is going to go first. After you, Nico.
Right, you are. Split. It started in the living room. So fine a line that you could have mistaken it for a single strand of spider's silk. Like the fly, I was caught by it, awestruck. Never had I seen a thing so perfect. I traced it with my fingers, following it through the house. It was immaculate. The whole building, near imperceptibly bisected by this slender partition. I had to tell myself to be gentle with it, because I did not want to interfere. If my finger were to chip away a flake of paint or somehow smudge the line out of existence, I could never have forgiven myself. I removed the furniture first, and once that was aside, I wrenched the carpets free. I was delighted to see the line completed then. An abstract ring around my domicile, like Saturn buried in the flesh of Mother Earth. For 4 days I watched the split, hoping that my luck would prevail and I would see it yawn anew. My social worker found me there and interrupted my prayer. She asked me what I was doing. Why was my furniture outside? The carpet torn up? I tried to explain that it had to be moved. Obstructing the divine work would be a sin beyond reckoning. She did not seem to understand the situation. I begged her, look upon it. Gaze into this crystalline slit in reality. Understand that the door would soon be open and the beyond, which has for so long called to me, will be revealed. She spoke of damp and plasterwork. She stuck a nail into the gap, and I saw in her intent to force it wide, to rape the work of God so callously. I knew then what I must do. I seized her by the throat and stole her hair. An act of righteousness. I dashed her on the floor so her last sight may be the split, so she may understand the purpose of her ceasing to be. It is all as it is intended. I did not like the way her eyes watched my beloved tear between worlds, so I took them out. I took her many pieces and I separated them. Everything a perfect split, right to left, and offered it in supplication to my gods. The crack did widen then, and drink her in, the tacky red of her sacrificed life draining to the ether. I saw it gape and dance so merrily. Across the line I went back and forth, each exultant leap sending me across the boundaries of worlds. If only she'd seen it, that I could have spared her. She was nice, in her simple way. I had made her 37 cups of tea in the time in which I had known her, and she had never made me one, an imbalance. Repaid now. Her slaked thirst and assurance, now the split has drunk of her. At some time I wanted to push the walls to perhaps broaden the split. Trust in the process, I would tell myself. Driving things apart where they ought not to be driven would lead to madness. Was already mad, I told myself. I'd killed that nice social worker. I had to beat myself then. How weak could I allow myself to become in the face of adversity? I was the one truth seer, so I had to stay strong, lest the earth's crust fail, and some great deity be forced to birth the new world by caesarean. I was stood at the labia of nature's puckered opening. I was to be the midwife to a world born anew. I thrashed myself with what I had to hand. The social worker's belt made fierce with carpet tacks. Each puncture reminded me of what I must see through. I thanked myself for it. No one else would have the foresight to do so. The police came after some time. Had I seen my social worker? She came just the other day, I told them. For I do not lie. To lie would be sinful, and I'd only recently purified myself. The police creature with its dark eyes told me I had blood upon me. I told them it was mine, and for my gods, and they would not understand. I showed my back to them, soldiers of ill fortune in their military garb. I heard it call me fucking mental as it left. I thought then of feeding it to the split, of tearing open that plated vest to see the beating heart inside, let it pump its fluid to the unborn infant world. I could see it peeking by then. The gap had widened and I could see the shadows underneath. It whispered in my ears what it needed from me. The egg within must be fertilized, it said. It had opened just for me. The pain I felt in my engorgement was bliss in its own way. It was by design. The righteous will always suffer for their sins. Only through sacrifice will they be delivered to eternal salvation. It did not feel like any mortal woman's body. How could it? What we perceive as wood and stone and copper is simply my weakness. My inability to comprehend the wonderment that lies beyond. From me it was fed my seed, and great swathes of blood that poured from ruptured flesh, splits along my shaft, my stomach, blessed splits, opening to pour me into the future. I slept for days and waited for my child to be born. I had not understood before that being father to a world would make me a god. But now it makes sense. I'm more than frail humanity. Like the Christ figure, I must be born anew. But weakness was his failing. Torture from a Roman is not for me. Those police beasts may return and try to nail me, but they will be too late. For I am ready. I've seen. I must become as one with my abode, so we may be reborn. The split may open wide, and with it drink this wretched world, and bring about my shining infant. The reality we all deserved. For as long as I can remember flicking at the corners of my eyes, I must split. I know the bandsaw ought to have the strength. I tested it on some fingers from the social worker. They came apart so easily. I knew it was destiny made manifest. I hung in a way that meant when I leapt, I can go no way but through. Become slit in twain and find the holy ever after, where I am recognized as God. The whirring of its mechanism is my first hymn. The sweet delight as I leap and begin to split. I feel the red rush out of me to join my love before I feel no more. No more.
I am considerably disturbed.
Good.
That was excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, all of the sort of very sort of vaginal descriptives that you were using earlier on. I wrote down, oh no, he's going to fuck the floor, isn't he?
It's like you know me, Ben.
Yeah,
Oh.
that escalated in a way that I wasn't necessarily expecting to begin with. But like you say, Ben, once it goes down that path, you kind of follow it through to its perhaps not inevitable but likely conclusion.
Illogical conclusion. a new term.
I had a lot of I made a lot of notes about kind of really great turns of phrase, and And a couple stood out for me, like Police Creature. I think the first time that was mentioned, I just thought, yes, that worked so well for me.
It's an odd one, isn't it? Like trying to write from a perspective of psychoses in that way. The language is starting to break down more and more. So I think phrases like that mean you can unsettle while still giving all of the required information, and that is, in a way, it makes it way worse, doesn't it? Because you're like,
yeah,
I know that is, but that's not right.
Yeah, exactly. It defamiliarizes something, and that's probably in some ways more unsettling, like you say, than some of the more kind of visceral graphic detail.
Yeah,
I would agree with that. I think that's actually a really solid point. You could potentially generate. I feel potentially you could generate more of that feeling by losing the visceral violence.
Okay.
From the story, and just like do it through implication rather than explicit description. That's a very potential note. I couldn't tell you whether that's definitely one way or the other because it was very good. I enjoyed it. The only bit that I felt that broke that for me, that kind of breakdown of language through his psychosis, was when he said "in the face of adversity," because to me that is a fairly cliche phrase. People overcoming in the face of adversity. You hear it quite a lot with, like, I don't know, people that have survived illnesses or combated gender inequality, whatever it is. It's sort of a buzz phrase that gets used, and it sort of stuck out like a sore thumb for me a little bit because everything else was so beautifully and oddly described and defined that to find that there was it tripped me up a little bit.
Okay.
So that's really my only like concrete note. I would definitely drop that line or change it to or do one of your things where you twist it into, like, Police Creature, change it, I don't know, looking at the back of the head of adversity or something, like just turn it on its head.
Yeah.
The copper, that one's difficult because I did find myself wondering why the copper left. When there was a woman had been disappeared and this guy was covered in blood and he was likely the last person that saw her. Is there an implication that he has already that he sort of killed them off screen, or is he actually, does the copper really just leave him be because he's a nutter?
So this is all meant to happen in a very short space of time.
Okay.
So it's not that the police have gone and then stopped investigating him.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more that this one cop has gone around and knocked on the door and gone, yeah, I'm not going in there on my own. I'm not dealing with this on my own. That guy's mental. I'm not doing this on my own.
Coming back, yeah. Okay, yeah. Oh, that makes a bit more sense. I think because it was such like a crazy ride that I felt like more time had passed than actually had then. But that might well be just my interpretation of it. But overall, I thought it was fantastic. I felt like I was going mad listening to it, which is always a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. I very much enjoyed it too, and I think I'm always in awe of anyone who puts voices to their work and can maintain it. So I don't know if you have a background in any voice acting or anything, Nico, but
I do. I'm afraid it's cheating, isn't it? But
no, it's great. Like if you've got it, flaunt it. Absolutely. And I know I listened to a few episodes before coming on this evening, so I know I was ready for voices. And I'm just as I said, I'm in awe of anyone who can do that and kind of maintain it through the complexities of reading your own work. So and it does add a lot if you can do it. I mean, it takes away a lot if you're no good at it. So I never do voices myself, but it's as I said, I'm in awe of people who do. And I imagine it's quite a lot of fun, kind of deciding on those voices ahead of time.
Yeah, I think especially because of the format Ben and I write for the most often, being the podcast, it is part of the writing process now. Finding the character voice, what do they sound like? Where are they from? Where is this story set? And letting it inform not only how I write the things they say or think, but, how is this going to be told? I think that story reads quite long, but it's only 1,100 words.
Mm.
but because of the way it's told, it sort of pulls itself out a bit, which may have part of why it felt like a longer time to yourself, Ben, because
Yeah, potentially.
it
Yeah,
paces quite slowly, doesn't it?
I think so. I would just say on the accent, because I've had the privilege of hearing what must be hundreds of different voices from you at this stage. I feel like I've heard this guy before. Is this the voice from Persistent Itch?
No, that was so I did consider that one, but that would have been it started in the living
Yes,
room.
that was it.
That
Yes.
one. I love that voice.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one. No,
I think
I was enthralled immediately from the use of it. It was great.
I think this one came out in the Alone some time ago, the one with
Oh,
Chris Beckett.
oh, crikey, that was early. Yes,
Yeah,
that's a good one.
good old Dr.
Um,
Bennett.
well, I think if you're up for it, Dave, we're on to you
Brilliant. Yeah. Fantastic.
Excited.
Okay.
whenever you're ready.
What's she chopping out there? What's she chopping out there? Doesn't she know it's going to rain again today? It rained all morning, and even under the trees, everything's still wet. I almost slip when climbing this time. But what's she chopping out there? I cup my hands around my eyes as if that'll help me see better. The chopping block is marooned in her yard. She likes to keep the area clear. Or maybe all that clutter, the broken metal boxes and scraps of plastic, knows better than to get close enough for the chop. Anything could be next, you see. Her husky dog keeps his distance too. He sits, rigid with attention, like I do when my father is shouting. Husky dog doesn't blink when the axe comes down. Thump. But I do. The first time, each time, I jump, even though I know it's coming. Well, not jump really. It's not bad enough I'd fall out of this tree. Just a jerk of the shoulders and a catch in my breath as the sound rolls off the chopping block, across the field, all the way to the tree line. What's she chopping out there? She's all alone in that house. Everyone knows that. Someone tried taking the house from her once. We all heard the boom. My brothers said it was a shotgun, both barrels, and they said it looking so eager, like when my father drops food onto their plates. Nobody we know has tried her house since. My brothers say she keeps little children in her cellar, or bits of them. Arms and legs, chopped cleanly off and stored in racks, like people used to do with bottles. I don't believe them, of course. I know when they're trying to scare me, or trying to make me brave. I don't believe them, but I'd still like to know, what's she chopping out there? She's strong. She has thick arms and wears just a vest when she's chopping. I pinch my own arm and find bone without even trying. But how am I supposed to grow big and strong when my brothers won't even give me a little hatchet, let alone a chopping axe, the kind that takes 2 hands and can split anything from before? Maybe that's what she's chopping out there, a thing that used to do something. Maybe a way of carrying voices from place to place. I've heard about those. They're messy when she chops them. Not people messy or animal messy. It's not wet like that. But lots of stuff comes tumbling out. She picks most of it up when she's done, but not all. Little bits find their way into the grass, spilt like seeds, just not the kind birds are interested in. But I am. I have to be sure she's inside, at the front of the house. That's where she likes to take a nap in the afternoon, when the sun streams through the windows right onto her favorite soft chair. Even Husky Dog can't resist the afternoon sun. That's when I creep into the yard. There's a fence, but it's just a few posts and boards. It's not for keeping things in or out, really. It's a line in the sand, a way of saying, this is mine, like Father's high shelf that isn't so high. I stop at the fence for one breath, two, and then three. That's all it takes for Husky Dog to make a noise if he's awake. The silence is a kind of invitation. First thing I do when I risk the yard is touch the chopping block. Maybe it's my imagination, but more often than not, it still feels warm. I run my fingers over the block. It's smoother than a tree, but cracked and marked all over like Father's hands. Next, I say a few words, special words, words I don't tell anyone else. They don't mean anything, but I remember them. Indonesia, lawn, bestseller, employee, magazine. The chopping block accepts my offering just like it does hers. And finally then, I look in the grass. That's where I find my treasures. The insides of old things are small, hard to see at first, but they often catch the sunlight if you look just right. I keep these in a metal box that's buried deep in the forest. I won't say where in case you go looking. Nobody will find it, ever. Not even my brothers, as clever as they think they are. But I find other things in the yard too. Last week, she'd been chopping up books. Can you believe that? Not just one book, passed around, pages torn out for starting that evening's fires, but lots of books, big bound things that stood upright, proud, until her axe came down. She was sobbing that day. I heard her all the way across the field. So I made sure to creep into the yard after she was done. Lucky for me, it was a sunny day, a real bluebird as my father calls them. I was hoping to find some pages to take back. Father would have been pleased with that. But instead, all the pages were gone. What was left looked a little like pages, but they weren't paper. I wasn't sure exactly what they were made of, so I gathered up as many as I dared and took them back to the woods. I can't read, see, but Father said they were jackets for books. Like my jacket, I asked. He took a deep breath and said, no. Book jackets tell you what the book is called and the name of who wrote it. He then said these were strange jackets because they all had the same name on them. For a moment, that was exciting. I was about to find out what she was called. But Father shook his head and said it was a boy's name. She hasn't chopped books since that day, and I should know. I'm always asking, what's she chopping out there? Like today. What the hell is she chopping out there? It's a rainy day, so it won't be safe to go looking in the yard. No sunny naps for Husky Dog. So, what's she chopping out there? Is it useful? Is it important? Is it hers from before? What's she chopping out there? I have a right to know.
What a powerful story, Dave. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Really, the way your measured cadence with the way that you performed that was a really good example of the other end of the spectrum from what you were saying about Nico's performance, where with the voice, you just sort of you read it in your own voice, but you injected a lot of tone, and it was so clear, and that matched with the it was equally matched by the sort of the powerfulness of your prose, because everything works, everything was working towards a goal, and sometimes you didn't realize what it was doing until it had done it. and that's such a delightful way to be told a story or to read a story. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
I think Ben's exactly right. I think on the page, you could tell that was a young man.
Oh
Like
yeah.
the words gave all of that without needing a voice, which I would say is a skill that I'm absolutely jealous of. It's a really lovely thing to be able to do, and then to elevate it by delivering it just well, for lack of a better term, is
That's kind.
a
Thank you.
great thing. I mean,
I'm just gonna say at the start, the under the trees still wet. That that immediate bit of sensory information that everyone can identify with just pulled me straight in, and then this sort of repeated direct interrogation of the surroundings from the small child. It created such a mystery that I was on tenterhooks the whole time, and that turning out to be the structure of the story was really delightful.
some great phrases in there.
Yes,
I wrote down the phrase "a thing that used to do something," which is such like a crisp, clear way to do that. Like surety without any knowledge, child perspective. It's such a good line for that. Or the line, it's not wet like that, but lots of stuff comes tumbling out. Talking about smashing up electronics as opposed to cutting up people. But the implication in that line is that he knows how wet it looks when you cut up.
I think it's
someone.
The subsequent line, isn't it? The not people messy, animal messy or something. Like it's a child being like, I know what it's like when you cut a thing in half. It's extremely disquieting with these like big noises through it as well, that like chopping and that booming of the shotgun in the sort of past of the story. Oh, fantastic! So often we find that stories share odd links when we've all written to the same prompt. At least Nico and I do, and this idea of when he offers the words to the stump, in that, and I think I don't think you actually say it explicitly, but it's a sort of a supplication. It's an offering, isn't it?
Yes.
Obviously, very something else happened in Nico's story that was quite similar, but obviously very, very different. I'm fascinated that Split brought that out, because what an interesting and odd thing to have both done in a different way. But I often you can see why, but I actually can't for the life of me see why that happened. But I really liked that it did.
It may all become apparent with your one, Ben. Who knows?
Yes, tie it all together.
Yeah, absolutely. I will just say one more thing actually before we carry on, because I really enjoyed the bit where the narrator says that he won't tell you where, just in case you go and try and find it. I thought that added a totally new layer to the depth of this story, and I really enjoyed being directly addressed by the narrator in that way at that point in the story.
I thought it was great.
I'm glad, because that was something I wasn't, one of the bits of the stories that I was a little unsure of, and definitely paused over in drafting and redrafting, thinking, because it is quite, some readers really don't like that being that kind of addressing, especially if it's not something that's consistently, part of how the story's made up. It can feel quite jarring. So I did think about that and wonder if it served its purpose or had kind of justified its place. But I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, I thought it worked very well.
There was a great description where you said that the chopping block was like his father's hands, which painted a real picture of how difficult the life they must be living actually is. Because we know she's out there every day slamming an axe into this thing.
And he's illiterate as well.
Dad's hand must be a state.
Yes, yeah. I did. I mean, as we all do, I imagine. I quickly Google image chopping block just to be sure I had a sense of what they might actually look like. And yeah, I was struck by how it's weird, isn't it? You use to chop up wood, you use another piece of wood underneath, and that kind of seems slightly odd in some ways. But they seem to me kind of an interesting mix of both smooth and rough. And I was trying to think of how to convey that.
That's weird because I googled "man has sex with house" and I didn't find anything.
Nothing really.
Yeah,
How
I
did
think
that
safe
not lead
sex
you
was
down
on.
glory holes? Oh, fucking fantastic! Love it.
Oh,
Right.
is it too much of a glimpse behind the curtain to ask what the book was?
No, I mean, so always my one of my struggles with writing is how much I give away and how much I keep
Can I
keep concealed.
can I give my guess?
Sure.
Was the name that was on all of them King James the First?
Ooh, it's a good guess. I mean, I like that, and I'm glad my story has room for it. But that wasn't my intention. Um, and that would certainly explain why they all have the same name on them as well. But if you've ever had any author copies, one of the things about them is you initially get quite a few, and it's wonderful. And then you have to move house with them, and you have to store them, and they're on top of all your other books that you actually, you keep because you want to read them, and you like keeping books. Our house is full of books. So I'm not quite sure why I came to think about author copies in that way. But yeah, they're an author copy, so that's why they've all got the same name on them.
I will say that I actually did have that inkling, and it does make that story really, really dark for us, I think, because yeah, I'm assuming that she was writing under a pseudonym, and and they haven't sold or something unpleasant. And I love this idea of this enigmatic and really intense neighbor doing odd stuff that the little boy next door is absolutely fascinated by and just can't quite comprehend. So I was quite happy to exist in a state where I wasn't really trying to guess too much. I was sort of enjoying the mystery through his eyes a lot. But yeah, I thought it was very well told and very well written.
Thank you.
Liked it
I mean, I must come clean to some extent. I don't know if either of you are Tom Waits fans.
I like a bit of Tom Waits.
Yeah. He has a song called "What's He Building" in there. And that was also something I wanted to riff off of as soon as the kind of story came up. And it's exactly that kind of vibe that you've described there, Ben, of, that curiosity about what's going on behind those kind of semi-closed doors in this instance that reveals just as much about the speaker as it does the subject.
Fascinating. I love it.
Gotta be careful, man. It kills the cat.
Right. Okay. I'd best round us off with a third one.
Tail, Papa.
Fantastic. Right. Here we go. It would have helped if I'd have had the document open and ready to go, wouldn't it? There we go. Split. Javi pulled on the handle, but knew it wouldn't open. Even then, he'd still need the keys. The car itself was a work of art. At first glance, it looked as though it was painted all black, and it was only on close inspection that you could make out the hidden leopard spot pattern. In direct sunlight, the boxy sloped lines made the machine appear to be a high-speed wedge pyramid of awe-inspiring intensity. At night, it became more than a machine. It seemed to breathe in the road through its turbo intakes. A nimbus of pink neon bathed the asphalt under it, flickering like a heartbeat with every rotation of the matte-black arched rims. Eddie liked to crank Eurosynth up on nights like that, and Javi felt every thumping cascade of those electronic beats in that bestial space that lives behind the eyes. That place grows like a hematoma with every nose bump, occluding normal brain function. Even the car had ingested a respectable amount of yayo over the last year, residue from the key bumps Eddie had offered Javi before every ride. 2 rules, Eddie had said when they'd first started working together. 1, I drive and I do the talking. You read the map and handle the stash. 2, don't touch my tape deck. Eddie had smiled as though it were a joke, but the index finger he pointed at Javi's face belied the jungle cat grin of his. My car, my rules. You dig? Javi had dug. For 9 months, they had ripped up the road between LA and Guadalajara, crossing easily through Mexicali and keeping the speedometer twitching over 140 on every starlit highway. A journey that should have taken 2 days, Eddie's car had regularly been doing in 16 hours, stopping only for gas and coolant. Then, after the pickup at a garage on the outskirts of Jara, it was back to the US of A. For just slightly more than 2 days' work a month, Javi was seeing more money than he'd ever dreamt possible for a high school dropout with a dope fiend for a wife. The car didn't seem to mind them pushing the compact bricks inside its hidden places. 150 pounds of the white stuff was their third man for every return journey. Javi and Eddie blasted rails whenever their attention began to slip. Javi from the silver dish inlaid into the dash, and Eddie from the apex curve of his steering wheel. "Dust it!" Eddie had taken to saying, and Javi would take their stash bottle and tap out a messy line on the stitched leather. Javi laughed like a hyena every time he saw what happened next. Eddie would lean forwards to snort at his wheel like some deranged vacuum cleaner, all the while keeping the nose of the car steady. Eddie would then throw his head back and snort, letting the pedal fuse to the metal as the pure stuff dripped down behind his nose. The final touch was that he would suddenly drop his head and roar at the road as though it were an enemy he intended to ram right through. Javi, intoxicated on the Ayo and Eddie's personality, loved it. Eddie would then talk at Javi with inexhaustible advice and critiques. He should leave that bitch. He should go back to school. They should start a business. Can Javi play an instrument? No. Why not? He should. There's nothing more freeing than making sounds on this green-blue planet. You know we're on this wet rock hurtling through the void of space, crewed by sentient monkeys? They don't know how to fucking steer it. Half-white English immigrant on his father's side, half North African beauty on his mother's. Eddie cut a path through life that left normal people like Javi coughing on his dust. His family had made their money a generation or two back and had been burning through it in style ever since. There had been just about enough left for Eddie to have a privileged early life of schooling in Madrid, skiing winters in Japan, and yachting summers on the Med. The green money that fueled it all had mostly gone by the time Eddie was looking to make his mark on the world, his father having bet the wrong way on Nixon and lost the dime or three to federal campaign-fixing seizures. They both spoke decent Spanish, Javi through what he could remember of his father's tongue, and Eddie from his tutors in Spain. Javi secretly winced every time Eddie spoke to the hard-faced Jara narcos, rushing his speech to appear fluent in a way that emphasized his atrocious European accent. It made him sound pretentious, but the narcos never reacted. It had all been working fine until they'd finished loading the car for that last time, and word had come down that El Gigante wanted to meet with Eddie personally. Javi's brows had wrinkled up when he'd heard that, but Eddie had smiled excitedly. "Looks like we're moving up. We were due it." Javi could never quite get his perpetual come-down head around the depths and heights of the skyscraping arrogance that was Eddie's sense of entitlement. But he hadn't said a word. He didn't need to be told again that he was short-sighted and limited by his lack of ambition. Eddie had been gone for 10 minutes. Javi's foot had bounced out the milliseconds as he leant against Eddie's car, repeatedly checking his watch. His eyes kept flicking nervously to look through the small perspex windows in the thin roll-up garage door. Javi could see a couple of armed narcos were calmly sharing a cigarette out in the warm night air, and their presence confused him. They had never been there before. After 10 minutes, Javi looked towards the door Eddie had gone through to meet Gigante. He knew it led down some stairs, but no more than that. Javi lit a cigarette of his own, intending to calm himself and patiently wait some more. He closed his eyes and took one long drag, and a blood-curdling echo of a scream caused him to cough and drop the thing. A machine whir started up somewhere below him, and Javi heard more yelling. He pulled on the handle of the driver's door, but the thing was locked. He considered smashing the window, but even in his desperation, he was terrified of what Eddie might say to him if it turned out he was imagining things. He knew he'd need the keys anyway. Unlike his brother, Julio had known how to hotwire a car, and that had got him killed when some LAPD with a hard-on had baited him with a Lambo just off the strip. Javi had refused to learn after that. Unsure of what else to do, Javi huffed a nose clam from the lid of the stash bottle. The plan emerged crystalline from his subconscious as the powder sparkled through the corridors of his mind. He had to go down there and get the keys. The door opened with little more than a creak. The metal-grated steps switchbacked down into the gloom below the garage. Somewhere down there was a red safety light. The demonic glow made him feel hot. Sweat sprung from his pits, back, and receding hairline as he stealthily descended. The door at the bottom was closed, and he eased the handle down before pushing slowly. The whirring started again, and with it came a sobbing scream. Javi heard something metallic grate against something organic, and nearly lost his yayo-fueled cojones. The screams covered his entrance, and Javi crouch-walked into the workshop. The first thing he saw in the dimly lit room, as he flattened himself next to a wall of boxes, was a narco holding a work lamp up over a fixed-position industrial drill bench. The second was the back of an enormous man sat in a steel folding chair. He appeared to be watching the workbench intently whilst blowing out clouds of cigar smoke. The third was the naked and bloody mess that was Eddie. Holes about the size of a nickel had been drilled through his ankles, and it looked like the men holding him were preparing to feed his knees through the machine next. The blood from the operation was dripping steadily over the side of the workbench. Javi's eyes landed on the discarded silk shirt, handmade Italian shoes, and crumpled chinos that had been stripped from Eddie. They were by Gigante's right boot, and Javi licked his lips as he waited for a chance to get them. They weren't even asking him questions. Eddie was babbling at them anyway about how it was Javi, all Javi. He was just the driver. He wasn't even getting an even split. The narco with the lamp flicked the switch on, and the thick metal bit began to spin with industrial ferocity. Javi had eyes only for the chinos, and as he heard the drill begin to bite into the cap of Eddie's knee, he went for it. He scampered forwards and snatched them up from next to Gigante. He didn't stop to see their reactions, but instead hurtled towards the door and up the metal stairs. He could hear shouting and the sounds of men chasing him, their heavy boots banging on the metal. One of them fired a shot up at him, which struck sparks with every ricocheting bounce. Javi slammed the door behind him and desperately upended a rack of spare parts in front of it. The keys were in the right pocket, where Eddie always kept them, and Javi shoved them into the lock. His hands were shaking, but he found the waiting hole behind the wheel as well. The engine turned over with a glorious roar, and Javi immediately accelerated towards the garage door. The thin metal buckled under the horsepower he threw at it, and he burst out of the other side. The smoking guards brought their American-made weapons up and put a few rounds through the windshield at him as he tore past them. Javi didn't stop until he reached the highway. He had taken the normal route home on instinct, but the shell-shocked paranoia that raged within him made him pause, before jerking the car suddenly around to follow the highway south instead. As Javi got Eddie's car up to speed on the open road, he dusted the wheel for himself and threw back his head for the drip. He decided right then to leave that bitch. Maybe go back to school or start a business. Fuck it. He might even learn to play an instrument.
That was electric, man.
Cocaine fueled.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Frenetic and intense.
There was a through line in it that I really enjoyed, which was animal language with the car, or at least like sentient, like it was the third character in their little drug running trio.
Yes.
Like you talked about how it didn't mind having the coke stashed in it, and you know about it roaring and all these things that, like, I could really feel that like 80s muscle car.
Yeah.
It's as much a part of the dynamic as either of them were. Like it was so central to the narrative. Really liked it.
I'm glad.
Really enjoyed that.
I was attempting to build this idea of Eddie as the more sort of predatory component in this sort of this Wild West jungle-y type environment that they were in, and Javi as more of a sort of scavenger, which is why I refer to him as a hyena at one point.
Yeah.
And then that sort of the baton sort of passes when their partnership splits up and he gets control of the the leopard car or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. quite different to what I've been writing recently, so I enjoyed it.
There's some fantastic lines that I just picked out that I think that was very early on, and it kind of ties into what Nico was saying about the car and how that's characterized. But there was a wonderful description of the bestial space behind the eye, and I thought, that really kind of grabbed me as not just a way of phrasing that, but a way of thinking about, I suppose, not just the drug use, but also, I guess, kind of bigger questions about like people and animals and how we're not so far apart from them and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And I just also want to pick up on that. We talked about a fair number of visceral things this evening, but just the description of what was done to the ankles, and I thought just picking ankles specifically worked so well in that moment. Yeah, I mean it's tough with those kinds of kind of visceral body horror stuff to shock people, and I think these days, well, a lot of readers anyway, and picking that kind of specific image to give them, really, really works, I think, to do that. I mean, it made me sit up and like, rub at my own ankles, as it were, and then that's what you want, right? Yeah,
definitely. That's exactly what I want. I had sort of test read this to somebody, and they also did that. They sort of sat up, hiding their ankles from me.
You did a good job of, while keeping the fact that cocaine was clearly making them do stupid stuff, getting that kind of Wolf of Wall Street, like describing the drug in the way that it would like send electricity through the corridors of your mind and all that stuff. They're like, oh yeah, it's amazing. It'll make you feel amazing. I mean, it'll make you get your knees drilled out, but it'll make you feel amazing. Also, I just got to give a shout out to the pronunciation Italian. Always enjoy that. Absolute.
That was a
top tier.
that was a late change that I'm very happy with. There's just something obscene about saying it that way, and there's quite a lot of a fairly obscene outlook in the stories, so I definitely wanted to convey that. I have now just remembered, after, like, I've been trying to think what these drills are called since I started writing this story, and it's a pillar drill, isn't it?
Yeah.
Damn it. Yeah. It's
obviously the normal connections. How did we both end up on someone end up in a piece of industrial machinery?
Yes. Yes. So that's why I was already in that headspace when of course we had David's excellent story, and so I was already thinking about the lines between the stories, and that was a really odd and clear one as well, wasn't it? Both machinery, both core
body parts.
Yeah. Oh.
No, I did really enjoy that. I think you chose. I mean, we've now brought it up a couple of times, but choosing that like animal language through line, and then that allowing things like, because with the drugs you were using slightly more, almost like, I would say, magical language, like you talking about things like electricity, which exist outside of the animal kingdom. It meant that there were like the out of drug world and the in drug world, and then points where they were bleeding over each other. And I think it just, by making that conscious decision to focus on a type of language, that being like the animal language, it gave your story a real strong element.
I'm glad that you like that. I mean, I don't want to give it too much credit, but I think there. I remember I read Crash, I think, when I was at university, and that kind of fusing of man and machine in that case, in like an autoerotic kind of situation, was deeply odd for me, and I haven't really ever done it since, in terms of like in my writing, or in real life actually. But yeah, there's a lot of like metal versus man in this, and thank you.
But Ben, have you ever considered fucking a house?
Well, now I know that you have, so
yeah, and I think we all have now, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, speaking of, I gotta go. That plug socket's looking mighty fine. So, I think we're nearly at the end of stories. So before we let everyone split, where is the best place for people to find you online, Dave?
So I am still on the Twitter, well, for better or for ill, and that's at D_Towsey. There's not many David Towseys writing out there, so I'm also not that hard to Google or find on things like the Head of Zeus website or dare I say the big river website that no one likes naming it out loud. Yeah. It's not too hard to find my stuff around, thanks to having a fairly unusual surname.
And you had a book out in February. Do you want to quickly give everyone give a little plug for us?
The old plug, not the house kind of plug that we're doing wrong things to. That's very kind. So the Equinox came out in paperback this year, hardback last year. Available in audio and ebook, obviously, from Head of Zeus, the wonderful Head of Zeus. It's a complex book. I'm sure we're going to get into that in a bit. But in short, it's a witch hunt set in a kind of fantasy reimagining of 18th century Austria. But the big thing in this world is that every person has two personalities in them, and everybody in this world is one person during the day and one person during the night. So like everyone has this kind of Jekyll and Hyde thing going on. So my witch hunter is that's his job. He goes to this remote village. There are always remote villages, but goes to this remote village to find a witch. But that's during the night, and then during the day, his brother starts to fall in love with one of the prime suspects, and all hell breaks loose, basically.
Sounds fucking fantastic.
Amazing.
We should definitely go and check that out, especially after hearing your incredible prose today. That's fantastic. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?